Aegon's dragons were named for the gods of old Valyria. Visenya's dragon was Vhagar, Rhaenys had Meraxes, and Aegon rode Balerion, the Black Dread. It is said that Vhagar's breath was so hot that it could melt a knight's armour and cook the man inside. The Meraxes swallowed horses whole, and Balerion, his fire was as black as his scales, his wings so vast that whole towns were swallowed up in their shadow when he passed overhead. Daenerys Targaryen to her Blood Riders. The Clash of Kings Chapter 12, Daenerys 1. The bond between dragon and dragon rider is something still we don't fully understand. And what's even more puzzling is sometimes how a dragon can bond with two riders who can be very different from each other. And until we learn more about the mechanics of dragon bonding, it seems something that will remain a mystery. But one thing we can do is perhaps select a dragon and see if there's some kind of pattern in their riders that they bonded with, or perhaps a personality trait they all share that might be key as to why they were able to bond with the dragon in question. The dragon I want to use for this video is arguably the most famous of the Targaryen dragons, Balerion the Black Dread, and he's been chosen for a very specific reason. Some of the riders seem to stand out as odd matches in the wider context of the dragon's other known riders, until you start to really dissect and break down their personalities. We will also be delving into some of the oddities with the Black Dread, specifically surrounding his final fate and what may have really caused it. Balerion is a willful beast, and not one to be trifled with. Jaehaerys Targaryen to his small council, Fire and Blood, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, their triumphs and tragedies. It is believed, like all three of the Targaryen dragons alive during the Conquest, that Balerion was named after an ancient god of old Valyria. By this time he was the oldest and largest of the Targaryen dragons, and the last surviving of the original 5 dragons Aenar the Exile had brought with him to Dragonstone, just before the doom of Valyria. We don't know the fate of the other 4 dragons. We have no records of any war or conflict that could have been their end, so it has been speculated they died of old age. We know so little about dragon physiology and how long they can naturally live. All we can do is guess based on the context. Regardless, it is very well possible that Balerion was the last living creature to have seen Valyria at its full glory before its fiery doom. By the time of the Conquest, Balerion was so large that his wingspan cast shadows that could engulf entire towns when he passed overhead. His teeth were as long as swords, and his jaws were large enough to swallow an auroch whole, or even one of the hairy mammoths that are said to roam the cold wastes beyond the wall. He was a very willful dragon, and not one to be trifled with. Some say you'd have to have been mad to try and claim him in his final years. Balerion's scales and wings were as black as night. His fires too were black, sometimes with swirls of bright red. While dragons often have unique colorations to their flames, none of the other Targaryen dragons ever had flames like the Black Dread. When he was at the full extent of his power, his flames could melt steel and stone and fuse sand into glass. He was known as the Black Dread for a very good reason. In canon, we don't have any indication how many riders Balerion had, or how old he was at the time of the Targaryen move to Dragonstone. However, it would make sense he was the youngest of the 5 dragons, if we are working with the assumption the other 4 Targaryen dragons died of old age. There have always been Targaryens who dreamed of things to come, since long before the Conquest. Brendan Rivers, to Dunk and Egg, a Knight of the 7 Kingdoms, the Mystery Knight. While I don't personally take 99% of the stuff HBO adds to the shows as their own lore as canon to the books, unless we specifically know it came from George R. R. Martin, such as the concept of Aegon's prophecy, there was a little bit of flair text added to a prop in House of the Dragon Season 2 that would seem to indicate Daenys the Dreamer was the first rider of Balerion, and that at the time he would only have been as large as a horse. Given this, it would mean he would have been hatched sometime before the Doom in 114 BC. While we cannot say if Daenys was the first rider of the Black Dread in the books, we can use this idea to estimate the number of possible riders before Aegon Targaryen. We know when a dragon bonds with a rider, they bond with that rider for life. Thus a dragon could maybe be claimed once a generation. Given 4 generations of Targaryens passed between the doom and the birth of Aegon, suggests Balerion could have had up to 5 possible riders during this time. Given we do not know how old Balerion was at the time of the doom, in book canon, we cannot say for certainty he didn't have riders before that point. The 3 dragons used in Aegon's Conquest have all gone down as legends in history, thanks to their role in it. But in the same way that Aegon's Conquest is remembered as well Aegon's, despite the role of his sisters, so too is Balerion's role in the Conquest more remembered than that of his kin, despite Vhagar and Meraxes playing an equally important part of the invasion. We don't know exactly when Aegon would have bonded with Balerion, but we do know it would have been prior to his marriage to his sisters, given Aegon briefly fought in the Century of Blood, where he burned the Volantene fleet as they tried to attack the free city of Lys. By this time the Black Dread was monstrously huge, whose fires burned hotter than Valyria itself, something which is clearly shown during Aegon's Conquest. The Targaryen Dragons made the conquest much easier than it would have been without them. The kings of Westeros had little defence against the flames of a dragon, even though some foolishly believed otherwise. Arguably, Balerion's standout moment in the war was the burning of Harrenhal, along with Harren the Black and all of his kin. Burning a castle might not seem like a hard job for a dragon, but it is important to recall just how huge Harrenhal was, the largest castle ever constructed, and if it had survived, would have surely been lauded as one of the wonders of Westeros, alongside the likes of the Wall and the Hightower and Casterly Rock. Balerion's dragonflame burned so hot that the towers of Harrenhal went up like candles, melting and twisting into shapes they retain to this day. Later, the Black Dread would take part in the Field of Fire alongside his kin, and just like Harrenhal, the dragon flame made victory all but certain, ending House Gardner and reducing the Lannisters from kings to lords. Having one dragon made all this too easy for Aegon. 3 of them, the kings of Westeros, never really stood a chance. Arguably, the second most famous thing Balerion was known for was forging the Iron Throne, with his dragon fire used to melt the swords of Aegon's fallen foes. The Iron Throne itself represents the power of House Targaryen and Aegon the Conqueror, the fire of the Black Dread being the force behind it. But even the largest dragon in the world can't win a war if your enemies won't give you a fight. Thus was the case during the First Dornish War, when Aegon looked to complete his conquest, with the Dornish hiding in caves, in the mountain passes, and only attacking in hit-and-run attacks, making it really impossible for Aegon to confront them in open battle. While House Targaryen took Dorne, they were unable to hold it. A few years later, during the 2 years that become known as the Dragon's Wrath, following the death of Rhaenys Targaryen fighting the Dornish, each Dornish castle, with the exception of Sunspear, was burned multiple times over by the vengeful Aegon and Visenya. Balerion was a statement of Targaryen power and sent a message to all those who thought they could rise up in arms against House Targaryen. But there was no rebellions, and Aegon managed to secure his rule. This is clearly seen when we look at the many royal progresses Aegon made in the wake of his conquest, to allow him to learn about his new kingdom. Everywhere Aegon went, Balerion went with him. He was in effect Aegon's black shadow, a lingering message of Targaryen power for all to see. It's hard to really know much about the relationship between Aegon and Balerion, as frankly we know so little about Aegon as a man and as a person outside of his deeds. We know that at the time of the conquest, there were only 3 adult dragons. We have no idea there were other hatchlings or clutches of eggs. This suggests that perhaps Aegon didn't really have much of a choice when it came to the dragon he claimed. If we assume he was the first of his siblings to claim a dragon, which we cannot say for sure, it would have been one of the 3 dragons we know of he had to choose from. From a logical point of view, if you had to pick a dragon, you might pick the largest and the most powerful of the 3. But what we learn about Balerion, if a dragon is akin to a nuclear weapon, the Black Dread and the power he offers is like dropping a dozen at the same time. Maegor, the first of his name, came to the throne after the sudden death of his brother, King Aenys, in the year 42 AC. He is better remembered as Maegor the Cruel, and he well earned the sobriquet, for no crueler king ever sat on the Iron Throne. His reign began with blood, and ended with blood as well. The writings of Yandel, the world of ice and fire, the Targaryen kings, Maegor. Obviously, Balerion's second known rider would come after the death of Aegon, in this case his son via Visenya, Maegor the Cruel. He claimed his father's dragon very soon after his death in 37 AC. Maegor at this time would have been 25 years old, ironically the same age his father was at the start of the Conquest. It is rightly pointed out that it's strange that Maegor waited this long to claim a dragon. Given by 37 AC, there were multiple hatchlings he could have chosen from, but what is noted in Fire and Blood is Maegor actively chose to wait to claim a dragon, that he'd always coveted Balerion, the same way he'd also coveted his father's sword, Blackfire. He viewed all the other dragons he could have picked from as unworthy. In a way, this speaks a lot to the ambition and drive of Maegor that I think would later play a key part in his usurpation of the throne from Aegon the Uncrowned. Some people like to question why Balerion would have chosen to bond with a man, well, like Maegor, who would certainly earn his moniker, the Cruel. But there is a really simple answer to that. Even the supporters of King Aenys, Maegor's elder half-brother, could not deny Maegor was much more his father's son than Aenys ever was. And while Aegon, as we know him, was not cruel or a tyrant, he was clearly ambitious, strong, determined and driven, all traits that Maegor possessed, traits that perhaps Balerion favoured. Maegor clearly saw the power a dragon like the Black Dread would give him. Maegor would actively use Balerion from the onset. Early in the reign of his brother, King Aenys, Jonas Arryn imprisoned his brother, Ronald, Lord of the Eyrie, and declared himself independent of the Iron Throne. Maegor rode the Black Dread to the Vale and put down his rebellion single-handedly, again like his mother did during the Conquest, when she won the Vale for Aegon, proving just how powerful a tool a dragon can be. After taking a second wife in 39 AC, Maegor managed to deeply anger the faith as well as his brother for doing so without his consent. In turn, Maegor was exiled to Pentos as punishment. The Black Dread, of course, went with him. Over the next few years, Aenys' rule would weaken, until in 41 AC, he married his two eldest children together, Rhaena and Aegon, provoking once again the anger of the faith, and beginning the Faith Militant Uprising, which very quickly became a real threat to Targaryen power in Westeros. It is believed the stress of the losing war, and his children being besieged at Riverrun, greatly contributed to Aenys' sudden death. There are those who rightly point out that in retrospect, if a man, a leader such as Maegor, had been present at court, a faith uprising may never have happened. Not only would Maegor have acted more decisively, but the looming threat of a dragon as great as Balerion alone might have been enough to prevent the thousands who joined the uprising. In a way, it's clear that Maegor saw this too. He saw that his nephew, Prince Aegon, was too weak to deal with the faith, and that a firmer hand was needed. Fire and blood was needed. This may have played a huge factor as to why Maegor returned from exile and declared himself king over his nephew. Maegor had the power to take the throne, the power to beat the faith, and was maybe the only leader within House Targaryen who had the strength to keep the house alive during this dangerous time. And while Maegor himself was a leader, the backing of a dragon, the likes of Balerion, was surely a key factor. The impact Maegor and Balerion had can be seen very quickly in how fast the war turned around in House Targaryen's favour. Maegor secured King's Landing and crushed the command structure of the Faith Militant by using Balerion in the burning of the Scepter of Remembrance, which the Faith Militant were using as a base in King's Landing, which gave him control over the city and wider Crown lands. He would also easily beat the Militant in battles at the Green Fork and on the Blackwater Rush. In the Westerlands, the king would burn down the seats of House Broom, Doggett, Farwell, and Lorch, whom all supported the faith. Maegor would even threaten Old Town, but the city opened its gates to the king after the unexpected death of the High Septon. Maegor had effectively put down this uprising and secured his power very quickly, and without even dealing at this stage with Prince Aegon, who was still, after all, his brother's heir and was pushing his claim to the throne. Even when he did turn his attention to Aegon, to whom some will call the rightful king, enough of the realm was firmly behind Maegor after the Faith Uprising had been destroyed that even without the use of Balerion, the war would have likely been in his favour. But even so, he would end his nephew's cause in a single battle. In the battle beneath the God's Eye, Maegor used Balerion to kill his nephew and his dragon Quicksilver with ease. Quicksilver, while smaller and faster than Balerion, could simply not beat the Black Dread's size and strength. Thus, In truth, Aegon and Quicksilver were always going to have a hard time winning. As far as we know, this was the last real time Maegor would use Balerion in combat. Maegor would die in 42 AC, after which Balerion would return to Dragonstone. After the death of Maegor, Balerion would remain unclaimed for much Jaehaerys the Conciliator's reign, with some minor exceptions. Some have been puzzled as to why such a powerful dragon would be left with no rider, and it's something we will never truly know the truth to. Some have put forward that Jaehaerys believed that whoever claimed Balerion would hold too much power, so if that person wanted to, they could maybe take the throne, just as Maegor had done. If this was Jaehaerys' mind, we have no historical record of it. There is also this idea that this new younger generation of Targaryens simply preferred the smaller but quicker dragons. The idea of cradle eggs had also become popular by this time, with many Targaryens now hatching their own dragons as babes, rather than choosing to bond with one later in life. Even so, over the reign of Jaehaerys, when someone could have claimed Balerion, they often chose not to. But there is one event that might allude to why this is the case, and that is the horrific fate of Aerea Targaryen. It has been 3 days since the princess perished, and I have not slept. I do not know I shall ever sleep again. The mother is merciful, I have always believed, and the Father above judges each man justly, but there was no mercy and no justice in what befell our poor princess. How could the gods be so blind or so uncaring to permit such horror? Or is it even possible there are other deities in the universe, monstrous evil gods, such as the priests of Red Rylorn preach against whose malice the kings of men and the gods of men are naught but flies? I do not know. I do not want to know. If it makes me a faithless Septon, so be it. The writings of Septon Bath, Fire and Blood, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, their triumphs and tragedies. In late 54 AC, Princess Aerea Targaryen, the 12-year-old daughter of Rhaena Targaryen and the late Aegon the Uncrowned, claimed Balerion from the yard of Dragonstone one morning without permission from either her mother or the king. The night prior, she had a bitter argument with her mother, which led to Aerea's rebellious actions. Both Rider and Dragon disappeared and went missing for more than a year. Jaehaerys sent expeditions out to try and locate Balerion and the young princess, and the Master of Coin, Rigo Draz, offered huge rewards for any information on their whereabouts. But no one came forward with information that was credible. Balerion was the largest living dragon in the world, but there was no sightings of the dragon anywhere. Septon Bath thus believed the lack of sightings suggested that Balerion was no longer in Westeros, and had flown with Aerea somewhere across the Narrow Sea. Aerea's mother Rhaena departed on Dreamfire and spent most of the next year searching for her daughter, but she did not find her. As there was no sign of Aerea, King Jaehaerys began to fear she was dead, telling the small council that it was likely Balerion had thrown her off his back. But Septon Bath disagreed, citing that Balerion likely would have returned to his lair on Dragonstone if he'd suddenly been without a rider. Aerea and Balerion were missing for more than a year, finally returned to King's Landing in 56 AC, with a severely ill Aerea clinging to his back. She was almost unrecognisable and was stick thin, and whatever clothes she still wore was nothing more than tatters. Her hair was matted and a tangled mess, and her eyes were bloody. Aerea collapsed on her arrival, and she was carried to Grand Maester Benefer. Septon Bath's accounts describe wounds and half-healed scars on Balerion. The dragon bore a huge jagged rent down his left side, almost 9 feet long, and fresh blood still dripped from the wound, hot and smoking. Bath speculated that when Aerea claimed Balerion, she was unable to bend the dragon to her will, and instead the dragon had taken her to the place he had been born, Valyria. What's more ominous is, given the size of the wounds Balerion carried, is what kind of creature could have possibly been responsible for it. Balerion would never be the same after returning back that night, with the wounds clearly causing lasting damage. The fate of Aerea Targaryen was more horrific than most historical accounts dare to mention. Benefer treated Aerea in his chambers alongside Septon Bath, who had been summoned to administer the rites of the dying. Only these two men witnessed her last hours, as the Maester forbade all others, including the king and the queen, from entering the chamber. Aerea was given milk with a poppy to reduce her fever, immersed in a tub of ice, but nothing helped the girl. She'd arrived at the Red Keep in the morning and by the hour of the bat after sunset, Septon Bath announced that Aerea Targaryen had died. She was cremated the next day at sunrise. It was announced that Aerea had died of a fever, which was only partly true. Sir Lucamore Strong, who had carried Aerea to the maester's chambers, said the princess's fever was so hot he could feel it through his armour. She had blood in her eyes, and her body had something inside her, moving. The knight would tell these stories until King Jaehaerys forbade him from speaking of the princess. Bennifer left no account of Aerea's death, but according to the accounts of Septon Bath, Aerea's fever was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. The Septon described her as burning, with red skin and having barely an ounce of flesh upon her bones, appearing gaunt and starved. Bath reported the swellings moved underneath the princess's skin, possibly searching for a way out and causing her great pain. He wrote, "I pray that I shall soon forget of the things she whispered, and that she often begged for death." It seemed to Bath as if Aerea was cooking from within. Her flesh grew dark until resembling pork crackling, and smoke began coming out of every orifice. Her eyes cooked within her skull until they burst. When the princess was lowered into a tub of ice, slimy, unspeakable things, making horrible sounds, emerged from under her skin, one as long as Septon Bath's arm. But the creatures of heat and fire died from the cold of the ice. The origins of the creatures that lived inside Aerea Targaryen are unknown. Bath speculates that Balerion did indeed take Aerea to the ruins of Old Valyria, and the worms likely came from there. So why did a dragon such as Balerion bond with a 12-year-old girl? Again, I think it comes down to some key traits that suited the dragon, traits that both Aegon and Maegor shared to some extent. Aerea was said to be lively, quick-witted and adventurous, with a willful and stubborn temperament and a bold tongue. According to Lord Rhaegar Baratheon, she had a fire in her that few others possessed, and Archmaester Galdane likewise describes her as a fiery young girl. Aerea stood out among the other Targaryens of her generation because of her nature. While she didn't share all of the key traits with Aegon and Maegor, I think there's clearly enough crossover with her adventurous and bold nature, especially if you consider how willful and stubborn she was, much like the Black Dread himself. When you look at his riders up until this point, despite her age and gender, you can see how Aerea could fit in with them. A looming question many fans have regarding how Aerea bonded with Balerion comes down to the mystery of why Balerion flew her to Valyria. There is a compelling fan theory that fits this story very well, so much so I tend to consider it to be true to some degree. We know on some level that the bond between dragon and rider is somewhat telepathic or mental. The idea goes that when Aerea claimed Balerion, she was emotionally upset due to the nature of her fight with her mother, Rhaena. She did what any 12-year-old girl would do and wished to go home, which Aerea viewed as the Red Keep. But being in such an emotionally heightened state when claiming Balerion, it confused the dragon. He misunderstood Aerea's idea of home and instead flew her to his home, his birthplace, Valyria. Aerea, being so young and inexperienced, didn't have the ability to control Balerion, hence why they went missing for a year. It seems only after Balerion sustained his injuries, Aerea was able to fly home. Balerion's trip to Valyria changed the dragon. He was already rather slow and ill-tempered, and spent most of his days sleeping before the trip. This only got worse after he sustained those mysterious, devastating injuries. Although the wounds he suffered did heal, it was almost as if they had left a permanent mark. Balerion the Black was 200 years old when he died during the reign of Jaehaerys the Conciliator. He was so large he could swallow an auroch whole. A dragon never stops growing, your grace, so long as he has food and freedom. Barristan Selmy to Daenerys Targaryen. A Storm of Swords Chapter 8, Daenerys 1. After returning to King's Landing, Balerion would not return to Dragonstone. Rather, he was moved into the newly constructed Dragon Pit. When Princess Alyssa Targaryen came to the Dragon Pit to claim a dragon of her own in 75 AC, the Dragon Keepers persuaded her not to try and claim Balerion, insisting that the dragon had become old and slow, suggesting to her that she would much prefer a faster, younger dragon. The Black Dread was now a shadow of his former self. The last rider of Balerion was Prince Viserys Targaryen, the future King Viserys I. He entered the Dragon Pit to claim the dragon in 93 AC. Balerion was hard to rouse, and struggled when Viserys urged him into the sky, but fly the old dragon did. They flew around King's Landing 3 times, although Viserys later confided to his father that he'd originally intended to fly Balerion to Dragonstone. However, feared the dragon lacked the strength to do so. Viserys had opted otherwise. Balerion the Black died in 94 AC, less than a year after Viserys had claimed him, and with him, the last creature to ever see Valyria before the Doom left the world. Bonding with a dragon seems to be a two-way thing. The dragon bonds with the rider as much as the rider bonds with the dragon. A lot of riders tend to bond with dragons they hatched, which makes sense, with the pair growing together. But not just with Balerion. But when we look at the cases of other dragons being claimed that we know about, that we know the details of, the riders of these dragons tend to share some similar traits that the dragon they claimed tend to favour. While Aegon, Maegor and Aerea are three very different people, the driven, adventurous part of their nature is something they share. They all had that certain fire and flair within them. They all seem to have shared some traits with Balerion as well. Viserys Targaryen seems to be the outlier when it comes to Balerion's known riders. He is distinctly different from his predecessors. So how was he able to bond with Balerion? Well, it's quite simple. Balerion was a very different dragon after he returned from Valyria. Whatever happened to him not only injured him physically, but in general made him more ill-tempered and lethargic. The dragon Viserys claimed was not the same one that Aegon, Maegor and Aerea had claimed, and as we can see from what happened only 6 months later, he was dying. The way Fire and Blood is written leads the reader to think that Balerion died of old age, but the reality of that is we don't really have any proof. We don't really know how long dragons live for, naturally. Yes, Balerion was very old compared to the other Targaryen dragons, but for all we know, his age could have been nothing compared to the dragons of old Valyria before the Doom. What a lot of fans suspect is that the injuries sustained in Valyria were a huge part of what led to Balerion's death. It is possible, if that had not happened, he could have lived much longer. The Black Dread is by far the most famous of the Targaryen dragons, and for a good reason. The role he played in the shaping of Targaryen Westeros cannot be understated. There is a reason why he's spoken of with such fascination, why his legend has lived on, just like Aegon himself.